Refugees, Migration, and Implications for Emergency Care. Dr. Yash Dubal is an emergency physician with almost 6 years of experience working at the Aga Khan Hospital in Tanzania. He headed the Accident and Emergency Department at the hospital for 4 years, chaired the Code Blue Committee, and co-created the mass disaster policy during his tenure. He has been a role model for the junior doctors who eventually chose emergency medicine as their career. Currently, he is self-employed and is pursuing through his company to make emergency care accessible in remote locations of Tanzania. Dr. Dubal is also an avid photographer and a book reader, which is evident by his Instagram and YouTube profiles. We are so delighted to have you with us today and to share your expertise in evacuations and migrations. I put his link to his YouTube channel if you're interested in exploring more there.
Thank you for the extravagant introduction. It is an honor to be speaking on this platform and shows how we adapt to our circumstances. If a live conference isn't possible, we will still conduct one, even if it is virtual. Kudos to the organizers for making this possible and for the never say die attitude, which is a reflection of what we do in emergency medicine. A big thank you to the listeners who are present to hear my experience. Working in Africa can present you with various never thought of opportunities. One such mission was that of refugees who are evacuated for resettlement to the USA. The refugees are usually from Congo who have been residing in Tanzania for various years and reasons. They are resettled by the international aid agencies who support their resettlement and pave a new life for them. Many a times they have big families which are sent for resettlement together, and at times they are united with their extended families who were resettled first. These families come from a background with no proper hygiene facilities, making flying in an aircraft very far-fetched. Occasionally, there would be a family member who may require medical assistance during transfer. This is an experience with one such patient. As a resident in emergency medicine, I was always fascinated by medical evacuations. The thrill of working in an environment which is space and could be resource constrained adds to the level of challenge one could face. One needs to make sure to put the thinking hat on and ensure the equipments and medicines which might be required are available on board. The room for error is extremely minuscule. This is a story of a 12-year-old kid who was HIV positive on second line of antiretroviral drugs. He was found to be resistant to the second line of antiretrovirals too. Unfortunately, the third generation ARVs aren't available in this part of the world. His CD4 count was in the tune of a single digit. The patient also had bilateral empyema thoracis secondary to Kaposi's sarcoma. The empyema was drained by bilateral chest tube placement at a hospital. By this time, he was in the hospital for about 3 weeks and had gone through some major fluctuations with his health. His work of breathing was improving and his oxygen sats ranged from 88 to 92% on room air. The series of chest x-rays showed findings which were significantly improved. Imagine you are asked to transfer this patient to a port of entry in the US with the final destination being another 5 to 6 hours ambulance drive from the airport. This was exciting and scary at the same time. The margin for error is extremely minimal and one needs to be adequately prepared in case of any mishaps on the long way. The key here was preparation like any other procedure to be performed in the emergency room, only that this one was going to last for 23 hours 30 minutes. The initial debate was whether to evacuate him through an air ambulance which was to fly from USA or use a commercial flight. Time was key. In this case, the definitive management was to be started in the USA due to various reasons. availability of third generation ARVs, and risk of causing immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome (IRIS) in the event if ARVs were to be started before flying. Upon various discussions with the team taking care of him, we felt comfortable to fly him in a commercial flight. The perk? We got to fly business class. Haha. But that was extremely secondary. We found the fastest way to get to the port of entry, which was one short stop for transit. We ensured we were well equipped and carried enough IV medications in case if the chest tube gets dislodged or if the patient was required to be intubated mid-air. Aircrafts were prepared with enough backup oxygen cylinders. Appropriate permissions were obtained to carry scalpel and other items on the flight for the same reasons. We entered the aircraft with a special crane and a separate entrance. The first flight was quite uneventful with no problems during takeoff and landing. Each passing minute in the transit was extremely stressful. We boarded our second flight similarly as the first one. During the entire flight, the eyes were hooked to the oscillations on both the tubes and the pulse oximeter readings. The patient was given analgesia intermittently for the pain along with his other medications. We landed at the port of entry, and the first people to enter the aircraft were the paramedics with the stretcher and immigration officials. One of the immigration officials shouted my name, scaring the heck out of me. I mean, come on, you're in the USA and an immigration official enters the aircraft and shouts your name? That must be some serious issue. They asked me for my passport, which I gave without asking anything. It was stamped and given to me back for a quick way out with the patient to the ambulance. Turns out some arrangements were done when we were flying to the US. We were in the ambulance within 10 minutes and on our way to the children's hospital. The patient thankfully was relatively stable and we made it to the hospital where a team was expecting the patient. The patient was handed over to the team for further management and was now in very resourceful setting. These probably were the longest 24 hours of my life, but totally worth it. The experience built a lot of confidence and helped me think the whole journey through as to what could be the potential requirements in case things go south. I made a good bond with the paramedics who then dropped me at my hotel where I had a very peaceful sleep. I flew back home economy class for those who were wondering. Thank you for listening to my experience. Have a great conference ahead. See you in the next one, hopefully in person. Take care. Bye for now. Cheers.
Medical evacuations are not the only source of uncertainty when it comes to intersecting emergency care and displaced populations or patient care. I would like to spend the next few slides discussing two key reports on climate change as well as displaced populations. We'll start out by sharing a few definitions from the World Migration Report and subsequently talk about a few parallels when it comes to emergency care and hazards for displaced populations. Migration is the process of moving within or across borders, either temporarily, seasonally, or permanently. It is commonly associated with an element of choice. Displacement, on the other hand, is considered to be forced in nature. Just as one example, it's the case of a severe flood or political unrest forcing people from their homes. When we talk about climate change, the majority refers to displaced populations. Planned relocation is the third term. It's just a form of organized movement of people typically instigated, supervised, and carried out by the state. The World Migration Report was recently released, and I would just like to bring your attention to Chapter 7 on migration and health. You can go to the link below. Essentially, it talks about a global agenda for advancing migration and health goals. They talk about how good health encompasses mental, social, and physical well-being, and that migrants are not automatically vulnerable to poor health outcomes, although there are specific risks that they may face. Migration and health research capacity needs to be built globally, particularly within low and middle income countries. And over on the right side, you can see various agendas when it comes to migration governance, development agendas, and global health agendas. Migrants present numerous sources of vulnerability, and trauma and violence is just one of those. This is just an image from the report. You can see the darker orange circles are just number of violent episodes. The darker colors represent increased numbers, whereas the lighter colors are fewer numbers of violence throughout these routes in just this one area on the continent. You can see many sources of violence and potential injuries that can result. This is also a recent headline. At least 140 people drowned in the deadliest shipwreck. And so migrants are in the water as well. And so there are certain risks in the sea for those individuals. This is the second report, Climate Change, Migration, and Displacement, that was released in 2017. And here's what it says. There's increasing evidence that the magnitude and frequency of extreme weather events are rising, and this is expected to increasingly affect migration and other forms of movement. The United Nations and other international bodies have also supported this, and the need for risk-informed practices now in order to prepare for the changing population. The 10 largest displacement events of 2016 were climate related. There was severe flooding in China, typhoons, hurricanes. In the US, we experienced Hurricane Matthew. Indonesia had rainy season floods and landslides, as well as in India. Again, it's answering the question, not if, but when these events occur, how will they affect people? Factors that influence migration. These are the 5 key ones listed: political, economic, cultural, environmental, and social factors. And then there are certain vulnerabilities and capacities that ultimately impact people. There was an index which ranges from 0 to 100 that assesses vulnerability to climate change. And so this was just a screenshot from a table that highlights several countries in Africa and their vulnerability to climate change. Certainly they're not the most vulnerable, but there are opportunities to improve and address some of the underlying vulnerability. So this was from 2016. And you can see there was climate-related displacement, hundreds of thousands of people in Myanmar, Ethiopia, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Nigeria, as well as the Philippines and India. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk about the responses to different hazards. Remember, there are slow onsets, so more chronic stressors, or there's more sudden onset or acute stressors. Acute stressors are floods, storms, cyclones, things that are maybe unexpected and may result in temporary displacement, whereas slower onset is something like sea level rise, where there's more of chronic insult. And then there are various ways people can adapt or change. So they can stay and adapt, they can migrate on a long-term basis and not return home, they can be displaced, and then they can migrate on a cyclical or temporary basis. Different regions have different responses. And then again, their underlying vulnerability and capacity as well that plays into the response to these various hazards. Lastly, this is a timeline of global policies. I just want to bring this to your attention. By no means should you memorize it or focus on it, but you can see there's a lot of really exciting work being done. And just in the last 10 years alone, it has garnered significant attention of how we protect millions of people, not only on the continent of Africa, but around the world, and then work together as different countries who are accepting these populations, for example.